welcome to Performance Anxiety, proud member of Pantheon Podcast Network. Steve Hackett joins us today. He's got a great live album coming out, but before we get into that, he tells me all about how he got started in music, and it wasn't through the guitar either. His time in Genesis is very well documented, including in his own book, A Genesis in My Bed. But Steve tells us his initial thoughts upon hearing Trespass and From Genesis to Revelation and what he thought about the band at the time. He's also recorded 28 solo albums in addition to countless collaborations, including music with Steve Howe, Chris Squire, and Brian May. And he discusses who he's listening to now and who can pick up the torch and create new, non-stagnant forms of music. Go to www.hackettsongs.com to order his new live album that features Selling England by the Pound and Spectral Mornings. Follow him on social media. Follow us at Performance ANX. If you like us, give us a review wherever you listen. I know what I like, and it's this episode with Steve Hackett on Performance Anxiety.
Hi there, this is Steve Hackett. You're listening to Performance Anxiety.
The first thing I always like to find out from guests is how did you get into music in the first place? I mean, was your family a musical family? Was there a lot of music in the house growing up?
My dad played a number of instruments just for fun, and I started trying to make music from the age of about 2.
Wow.
He gave me a harmonica, and I was, most kids would have gone, yep, leave it, on to the next thing. But right. I was mad keen on it, apparently, ever since I was 2. That I was, my mother says I was playing the same tune over and over again. But I know what I was doing. I do remember I was trying to isolate the notes, and by the time I managed to isolate the notes, then I realized I could play tunes on it. And so I can't tell you exactly when that happened. It's around about the time of 3 or 4 years old, and
wow, I
remember exactly what the tunes were. They were, one was Scotland the Brave, the other one was God, whatever it's called, the English national anthem. What's it, Queen?
God Save the Queen.
Yeah, that's it. God Save the Queen, and the other one I think was Yellow Rose of Texas. So
oh wow,
they're all kind of very place orientated, aren't they? Scotland. There's England, and there's Texas, in mind. Not that I had any idea what Texas was or where it was at that age, but I was to visit eventually, of course.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And it was really, my dad was the introduction to music. He was able to play a number of things, mainly wind-blown things. He did a bit of bugle, a bit of clarinet, a bit of harmonica. And eventually he was the one who introduced me to guitar some years later. So
about how old were you when you got introduced to guitar?
Well, it was a pretty big guitar. My dad brought it back from Canada, and I was just about able to get my arms around it when I was 12, and so I was messing around playing lead things on it. But he showed me some chords when I was about 14. Then it was every day I was mad keen on it. He showed me 3 chords, and that was it. I was hooked, and that's been it until the present day, of course. So
and you still do play some harmonica?
I do still play harmonica. That's right. Yeah. I love blues. I love blues harmonica. Paul Butterfield was my favorite, but there were many others too. Little Walter.
Oh yeah.
Sonny Boy Williamson. Many others, but I loved the sound of distorted harp, where it was a little bit like a guitar, a little bit like a trumpet, with vibratos with it, and it's a very expressive little instrument.
Oh yeah.
The chromatic gives you more notes, but it's the blues harp that gives you the sound, really.
When did you start playing in bands? How old were you when you started actually venturing out and playing in public?
Well, I think I was, from the age of about 16, I was trying to get things together. I was trying to get a band together. Abortive attempts, of course. The occasional gig here, there, and everywhere. I made an album with a band called Quiet World in 1970, just a year before meeting Genesis. I met them in 70, joined them at the beginning of 71. And it was a very busy time indeed.
Oh, yeah. So you famously put an ad out, which is how you met Peter Gabriel and the rest of Genesis. And, you said you wanted to go beyond the
existing music forms. Yeah.
Exactly. And if I read everything correctly, Peter suggested you listen to Trespass before you play with him. What were your thoughts on Trespass? And did you listen to From Genesis to Revelation at that time? And what were your thoughts on the guitar work on those two albums?
Right. Well, I think they were less keen as a band on Genesis to Revelation. I think that they felt that that Trespass was more what they were all about, and one track in particular, which was Stagnation. And that track, as several others, famously had this sound combination that was a cross between guitars and keyboards, 12 strings, sometimes 12 string put through a Leslie cabinet or two. And so it sounded as if you could be listening to a team of harpsichord players. It was an interesting sound texture, lots of chiming stuff happening together. There was a certain amount of influence of Jim McGuinn and the Byrds, but in a way, Genesis 12-string sound was gentler and more acoustic, but nonetheless, it had a very subtle kind of energy about it. And now, when I hear guitars and I think, oh, wonderful, I just do a very simple album of guitars screaming away and playing as fast as possible. And then I think to myself, but there's this other aspect of guitars where they can function in a very subtle way, and they can chime away. And live, I still use it, sometimes mixed with sympathetic keyboards, sometimes it's harpsichord, sometimes it's guitar sample, sometimes it's a variax, and we have all these things chiming away. Sometimes it's two real 12 strings. And I think all of these things chiming away can create a very sympathetic sound. So the latest live thing I'm about to release features some of that with the whole of Selling England by the Pound. So
it's a very ambitious set list on that. And I want to ask you some questions about that, but I wanted to, when you first listened to Trespass, was it an instant attraction to the band, or was it more you listening to the potential of what it could be?
I think because Genesis had this very subtle approach. It was not really a rock band. Half the songs we played together live in those first 6 months or so were acoustic pieces, and they really used to try the patience of audiences at that time. Genesis was not a famous band, and when you're playing to students, we had to compete with the bar for a start, which would often be in the same room, and we get drowned out. And I used to long for the loud moments. I think the quiet moments obviously had great subtlety. So in a way, Genesis had this kind of impressionistic aspect to the music. I think it was, closer to Debussy in a way, sound, what do they call them? Tone poems, this kind of thing. Genesis was a band that had taken on board this kind of thing. Whether or not it was conscious, I can't say, because I was not a founder member. I joined as they were about to embark on the third album.
Right.
Some of the stuff was written, a lot of it we wrote together. It was an extraordinary time. We just acquired a Mellotron, and
now that was your influence, though, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. I knew we needed a Mellotron. I knew we needed to expand the keyboard possibilities. So, there was something about that. I knew that Genesis would benefit from sounding like a kind of an orchestra from time to time. I knew we needed that. About a year later, I knew we needed to get a synthesizer. I certainly knew that we needed to get a light show.
Oh.
And so, the presentation was all important. And Pete ran with the ball with all of that, and
famously
the action, and became the personification of the music very much in those early days. So it was a band that I was intrigued by rather than, wow, I've got to join this. I thought,
okay,
the band is at a certain point. If I throw my lot in with them, I think I can give it something, and I think it will stand more excitement and a harder edge and all of that. And I've never really written in a team before, so I had to learn that band politics was something that would perhaps slow that down. My trajectory within it. And
Genesis was famous for that.
Oh,
for band politics.
Yeah. Band politics. Every band is, but I think that it became an extraordinary band over time.
Oh yeah.
With my encouragement, I like to think that Tony managed to shine. I was mad keen on what the keyboard could do, because I knew that he had access to far wider harmonies than could be conjured in one go on a guitar. So I was and remain a big fan of the keyboard. For a guitarist, that's not necessarily the most obvious thing to be looking at. But then I tend to think like a keyboard player.
Oh, really?
And I think like an orchestrator. Yeah, all my ambitions are in that area.
Okay.
Not that I want to sit down and play keyboard myself. I mean, it's a means to an end. It's a key to the door of harmony rather than the thing that I want to spend the rest of my life doing. I know my way around on guitar, but when it comes to keyboard, I have to go, where does C start? Total beginner stuff.
So it's exploration for you.
Yeah, I think that you can demonstrate things on keyboard that on guitar would be more difficult to do. I mean, to be able to access samples and be able to sound anything from a pipe organ to a string orchestra. By the time you've programmed the stuff up, it really is indistinguishable from the stuff in real time these days.
Yeah, no kidding. It's amazing the progress.
Yeah, some fantastic stuff around incredible software, which isn't a thrilling word, but in practice, it's not a very sexy word, but the possibilities are really endless. It's just a case of how much patience have you got, and how skilled is your programmer, come arranger, come. And all the rest, it's an extension. I think there isn't really any separation between living room and studio and TV and
not anymore.
It's all not anymore. No, it's all one really. The writing process and rehearsing process. It's all one. Speaking
of that, now how did you decide to start doing solo work? Because your first solo album came out while you were still with Genesis.
Yeah. Future was looking extremely shaky after we'd lost Peter Gabriel as lead vocalist after Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. He'd been champing at the bit for quite some time. He actually wanted to go away and write a screenplay with William Friedkin, who just directed The Exorcist. And Friedkin was keen on Pete writing some kind of treatment for the screen. But he was horrified. Friedkin was horrified that the price of that meant that Genesis would lose its lead singer, and he decided that he was going to drop the idea. And Pete came back to Genesis, said he would do one more album, fulfill all the touring commitments, and then he was going to essentially certainly take a rest from music, which he did for a while. He wanted to devote more time to family. So there were other pressures that were over and above being the lead singer of a hot band.
Yeah.
And I respect him for those decisions.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Do that. I understand it.
And then you've 2 albums later, you decided to embark on your solo career.
Yeah, mainly because I was really forbidden from continuing to have a parallel solo career.
Okay.
By Tony and Mike, who'd become the controlling interest within the group as founder members. And I thought, well, there are no guarantees of getting my songs done by the band. Tony has all these guarantees of getting his stuff done because he's insistent and he's a founder member and he has the alliance with Mike. So they always voted as a pair. And now I'm not complaining about that. I suspect that had I formed Genesis myself at school, I may have felt the same way, that the band is a vehicle for me to get all my songs done.
Right.
But, the lines are very much more clearly drawn up when you're working on somebody's album. If I'm working on an album by me, for instance, everyone does what they can to please what I want.
Right.
And if I work on someone else's project, I realize that I'm there to serve their project, whether it's 2 minutes involvement that I have or 2 weeks. And as it was when I was working with Chris Squire, for instance, when I first started working with him. It was 2 weeks work flat out. He had a very tight time schedule and he wanted me to play guitar on the entire album. And so I worked very hard to bring that in. And we became great friends over that. He was very pleased with the result.
Was that the Squacket album?
It wasn't the Squacket album.
Okay.
It was an album of Christmas songs.
Oh, okay.
Chris Squire's Swiss Choir, and it was well-known Christmas carols and all sung by a choir, but also with rock band. So I spent a couple of weeks doing things which sounded pretty much like, we were talking about the Byrds and Jim McGuinn. The guitar work I did on that was remarkably similar to that. I thought, Christmas album, jingle bells, jangle guitar. So it sounded very much like that. And so when it was mixed, it was given vocal priority and you can hardly hear the guitar at all, but that wasn't his fault at all. The fact is that I did it and the sound of it was absolutely wonderful. Yeah. So, I don't know how we got here. What the question is. I'm off. Oh, no problem. Already. Yeah.
That's what the whole show's about. It's just conversation. So I don't mind tangents at all.
Right.
So after, I'd say, what is it, 7 or 8 solo albums, you actually went back to being in a band with GTR. Was that a difficult process after so many solo albums to start writing as a band, as a member of a band again?
Most of the stuff was written between myself and Steve Howe. I liked the idea of working with him. Again, it was this association with Yes that had gone back several years. Yeah. I befriended Pete Banks, who was the original guitarist of Yes, and he asked me to work on his solo album. So he was on it, Jan Ackerman was on it, I was on it, John Wetton, Phil Collins was on it.
Wow.
It was heavily guested. And then all these years later, I end up working with Steve Howe, and I end up working with Chris Squire, and working in a band format with Steve Howe was, I guess, a return to the idea of working within a team, where you can't get all your own way, but on the other hand, as regards the writing, it was really sort of neck and neck with the two of us. I mean, the first day we started working, he played me some stuff he'd recorded at home, and I already had a song, and I thought the instrumental part to what he was playing me was really strong. When the Heart Rules the Mind, that instrumental part at the beginning was something he already had written, and the song, I already had an idea of the song, that When the Heart Rules the Mind, the idea of the top line and melody, and we started writing the lyrics together. So I said to him on the second day, thinking we'll either have a songwriting partnership here or we won't, and I'm going to say to him something very controversial, and I said, I think your song has a great instrumental part, but I believe I've got something here which might be stronger as a song. What if we merged the two? And he said, okay, why not? And so, his shoulders were broad enough to
that's awesome.
Take on board the idea that we'll be stronger with two heads on this. And so I think it was a very good tune. Funnily enough, I re-recorded it in recent times with Steve Rollery, and it showed up on a compilation album I worked on. Cool. But it was great to revisit that, and I had great fun doing that. And I may go at it again and add some more touches. So it was great fun. It was great fun to work on that.
I read
different uses of guitar, different types of guitar. GTR was born, and I noticed after that people started to make very literal guitar albums, and these guitar pairings, or 3 guitarists, 4 guitarists, whatever. So when it was Paco de Lucia, John McLaughlin, Al Di Meola, these guitarists getting together, and so in a way, I think we spawned a whole kind of thing. Jeff Beck's Guitar Workshop.
Yes.
People naming things. Here we are. Here come the guitarists again. The fight back of the guitar after keyboards had reigned supreme perhaps throughout the 1980s. Oh, you don't need guitars because it's an outmoded, superseded instrument.
Yeah.
And who could disagree with those words of wisdom?
Yeah.
But we did, and I think we started something. Perhaps it was going back to an older model, the idea of what Keith Richards and Brian Jones had done in the Stones, and what Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page had done in the Yardbirds together. The idea that you can have 2 guys,
2 leads.
You can have 2 guitarists doing things and not necessarily getting in each other's way. So it can work. It can work very well. It's an interesting combination. That's all I can say.
I read that at the end of GTR, you actually ended up recording some demos as GTR with Brian May. Is that first of all, did that happen, and has that ever been released?
Yeah. Eventually that stuff came out under the name of Feedback 86.
Oh, okay.
Some stuff with myself, Brian May, Chris Thompson, who'd been singing with Manfred Mann's Earth Band, Bonnie Tyler, to mention just a few notables in the guitar and singing department. And so that was very interesting at that time. And of course, people had their own commitments to their own bands. I mean, of course, Brian and Queen were still very much up and running as a going concern, and so he was a very busy guy.
He's always a very busy guy.
always a very busy guy, and I'm sure very busy even now, and we see each other from time to time. Very sweet guy, very, very driven, very very low key on one level, but obviously a brilliant band leader. I think.
Yeah.
Both, I think, with Brian, I said to him the obvious, which was the things that characterize Queen are your guitar playing and the guitar orchestra, and the harmony vocals, featuring Freddie and all the rest. It's the vocals and the guitars, or the guitars and vocals, that define the colouring of that band.
Oh yeah, so dynamic.
And the multi-layered thing, whereby I suspect as a live band they would be forced to do something really rather different. You can understand the We Will Rock You, the simplicity of something like that, versus the heavy multi-layered thing of all these guitar harmonies, which Brian says, when I first met him, he said, I was very influenced by the Genesis track, Musical Box, first track, Nursery Crime. And then I thought, yes, right at the end, the guitar goes into a 3-part harmony. It was one of the high points at that time, but I had no idea that was going to influence him. Of course, there was tapping, there were guitar harmonies, and I think of Queen as a hugely influential band, and to think that we've influenced each other. And other guitarists sometimes crop up and say that that they've been influenced by me, and I'll be influenced by them in turn. Van Halen, Eddie Van Halen, Alex Lifeson, and these are all people that listen to each other.
Exactly.
So there's room for everybody. That's the main thing.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. So you've done 28 solo albums, 6 Genesis albums, and plus 1 EP, the GTR album, Squack It, Quiet World. Do you ever find yourself with writer's block or writing a new song and thinking, oh crap, I did that in like 1992? Is it hard to come up with new ideas after that many albums?
I think the way to search for new ideas is to work with musicians around the world, and not necessarily to embrace the term world music, but to work with people who are playing instruments that are less familiar, and to try and broaden rock's shoulders. So the clarion call that I had back in the day of the ad that Peter Gabriel answered was 5 years of advertising before I perfected the words for that ad that eventually found their mark. So 5 years later. Now, of course, decades later, I'm thinking, well, in order to live up to that, the idea is existing stagnant music forms, then you must take on board this pan-genre approach and look at other styles. And in order to do that, you have to look at instruments from all over the world. So just, for instance, recently I bought a Vietnamese stringed instrument called something they call a Dine Shine. Easily mistaken for a koto in many people's books. The Oriental harp, the Chinese harp, the Vietnamese. And I've been recording with that, and also Chinese flute, the Ditsi, and I've been working with duduk from Armenia, and the tar from Azerbaijan. And I'm going to be working with a guy from Tajikistan playing a thing called the dutar, which is a 2-stringed instrument. But what they play on that is highly rhythmic. The right hand moves as you're strumming are at least as complex as the most complicated of moves that you hear from flamenco guitarists. But it's essentially based on the idea of a sympathetic drone because it's two-stringed.
Is it similar to like a shamisen?
Not really. No,
Okay.
no. It's they can play it slowly or very, very fast. When I think of the shamisen, what I'm aware of is, this very slow thing. I think that if I was to do shamisen, it would be a little bit. I would probably use the Vietnamese instrument, and indeed I've played it in a shamisen-like manner on something new I'm working on. But then there's also the things that are more recognisably rock and roll, and also having been very influenced by Russian composers, I've been working on something recently that's got an aspect of Prokofiev and Tchaikovsky and Stravinsky, all of those things, because they're harmonically very informed, but also Stravinsky very rhythmically informed stuff. So these are guys who really knew their way around the orchestra, but with very different personalities musically.
Okay. All right. So you've got a new live album coming out.
Yeah.
And it celebrates Selling England by the Pound, and a lot of your first solo album, if I'm correct, and then a little bit more of Nursery Crime at the end.
There's various things. There's Spectral Mornings. There's most of Spectral Mornings. There's some stuff from At the Edge of Light, which is the most recent album, and there's also a couple of things from Trick of the Tail. To be honest,
okay.
But it's a kind of the set that we played live was nearly 3 hours long with a 20-minute break in the middle.
That's amazing.
So I always say people can go and powder their nose in the break, but essentially it's about that long. The CD version has the chat cut down, so you can go song to song, but the DVD stroke Blu-ray has all the stuff with the introductions and the whole thing, so you can skip ahead if you want to get past the intros.
Yeah, that's the stuff that I love.
Let's get to the favourite tune. Boom.
Yeah,
that's really. But I loved Selling England and still do. It's the album that John Lennon picked up on the band at that time and said we were one of the bands he was listening to, and so I was very pleased with the album at the time and thought it was very idiosyncratic, very individual, hugely eccentric, and very, very British, very English.
Yeah.
And so I was thrilled that he was listening to us at that time, after we'd all spent so much time listening to him and his little band.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That was a great feather in our cap.
Oh, absolutely. How difficult was it to put the band together? I mean, Peter Gabriel has a very unique voice and very unique style of singing that's not easy to replicate, and Nad Sylvan does an incredible job.
Well, the band had been in existence for a while. We were spending half the show doing the Genesis stuff and the other half solo stuff, and so it was really basically two sets with a 20-minute break in the middle. And Nad has the ability to sound like Peter at times, or like Phil, or even covering some of the stuff I did with Richie Havens. He deepens his voice and has the ability to channel, it seems. And
that's amazing.
And then the latest additions to the group were Jonas Reingold on bass and very excellent 12-string, and he's another Swedish guy along with Nad, and Craig Blundell, who'd been working with Stephen Wilson and many others. Very, very busy guy at the moment, and we're just starting to record together. So in the lockdown, there's been the live album, and there are various things that are being lined up to follow, all very different to each other.
Okay.
Kind of halfway through a new rock album, but it has these world music aspects to it, so that's going extremely well, extremely experimental at times, and
great.
I think that anyone who's thrilled with the mixture of rock bands working with orchestras, I've got a feeling that this might well suit them. It's something that I think it was always, ever since the Beatles did I'm the Walrus, the idea of working with an orchestra was always a very tantalizing prospect. Eleanor Rigby and I'm the Walrus, the two greatest uses of orchestra with the Beatles, and I think Procol Harum with 2 tracks on A Salty Dog, the title track, A Salty Dog.
Yes.
Fabulous orchestral arrangement, as we all thought in Genesis. And The Wreck of the Hesperus, again, a marvelous orchestral arrangement around a tune, around Matthew Fisher's time with that band, and Gary Brooker, of course.
Yeah.
Those are probably 4 examples, I think, of songs that were just transcendent due to the use and the incorporation of orchestra.
Well, I know we're running a little over here. I know I only have you for a limited time. I have just a couple. I asked on social media if anybody has any questions for you, and I got a bunch of responses. So I wanted to throw a couple out to you if you don't mind.
Sure.
Before we wrap up. All right.
Yep.
Sean Cavanaugh.
Enjoying Genesis again? No. Let's get that one out there.
Yeah, okay, and what's Peter Gabriel like is the one that came up mostly. So I don't.
What's he like?
Yeah,
he's a very, very sweet guy, very, very talented, and I do believe he cares about everybody. He's got a very big heart. He's a clever guy, and also very, very sweet, very, 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 very nice guy. Very modest. And not at all like any of the theatrical parts that he's played. No, he's not like an alien with bat wings.
Or a big triangle.
No. He's very, very low-key, always was, apart from when he shaved his head in the middle.
Yeah.
That was not a low-key look.
No, a very distinct look.
Very distinctive. It lasted a while, then it was a passing phase.
Sean Cavanaugh wanted to know, what is your stance on crop rotation practices in 14th century Europe?
Oh, fantastic. Yes, that sounds like something Wayne's World, doesn't it? Well, yes. The agrarian revolution, of course, had yet to happen.
Yeah. All right, and we already got to one question, which were the thoughts on Trespass and From Genesis to Revelation.
Yes.
And my brother is possibly the biggest Genesis fan from your era of Genesis, and
right, okay.
He wanted to know. So this is from my brother. He wanted to know, after you looking back on the ad you sent that got Peter Gabriel's attention, how do you feel currently about the stagnant existing styles of music, given that you've actually done a lot of stuff that may have been considered stagnant, like the blues album and all.
Yeah.
How do you looking back on that? How do you feel about the existing styles of music?
Okay, if I could address that, to do a blues album is working within a given tradition. Mm-hmm. To do a Baroque album, like Tribute, with pieces of Bach, is working within a given tradition.
Right.
Not everything I do has to be revolutionary. Sometimes it's classical, sometimes it's folk. So some albums I think have been more experimental than others.
Yeah.
But in terms of the existing scene at the moment, there are 2 British bands that I think have perhaps carried the candle forward and kept it alight. Funnily enough, I've just befriended one guy recently, Guy Garvey, and of Elbow, and I was saying to him, what a great band I thought they were.
Yeah,
and,
I've heard of them.
And so again, there seemed to be this mutual appreciation about what we'd individually done, and I also mentioned Muse, because I felt that Muse were a band that were plainly taking the pan-genre approach, where you would listen to one track and think, it's probably influenced by Prince, and the next minute there's something that's a piece of Chopin or Beethoven or whatever, and wander off into something like that. It's the sort of thing that Nina Simone would do, because she was trained as a classical pianist. She, in the middle of playing, she would start to, and singing all this soul stuff that she was so renowned for. The fact that she wasn't allowed to go to music college and study because she was a black woman at a time when to be female would be enough to disqualify you. To be black would mean they'd run you out of town.
Right.
And so, but nonetheless, she was a classical pianist, and she wanted to honor that original aspiration that she had as a young girl. And so she spoke about Bach as a master musician. And what's that got to do with soul music and her career? Well, as a multifaceted artist, that's perhaps what it was all about. So the current state of music, I find pretty predictable in the main, and so I'm not hearing a lot of experimentation. So maybe it seemed to be up to us older guys to continue to experiment. I like to think that it might be possible for young bands to take a chance and say, if we get our stage show together, post-COVID, of course, at this point, but no one can really do it. But everyone can certainly concentrate on their writing, their recording, and I'm sorry to sound too much like Batman talking to Robin and telling him how to head forwards, but this is an opportunity to go back to the drawing board and really come up with a great tune.
That's a good point.
Yeah, there's no rush to get out there again.
Yeah. I mean, touring will eventually happen, but you don't know when.
Yes, it will. It will happen. And so I imagine that just as a result of you and I talking at this point in time, there'll be a band, there'll be a writer, someone will, say, hey, he's throwing down the gauntlet here, he's throwing down the challenge, saying, I believe you can do it. You can, usually, I think that the best way to encourage it is criticism doesn't really work. It's no good pointing the finger and saying, you ought to try harder. It's not like that. I think that if you compliment someone on the small strides that they're making, because it all starts off as small strides, if you're positive and you encourage people, I've seen it happen. I remember a young sax player who was just starting out. I was due to play with him at his father's funeral. I mean, a memorial. And I said, well, let's try this. And it was a piece that I thought would be difficult for him. But he was either going to say to me at some point in time, he was either going to say, this is too difficult, I can't do this, I'm going to give up, or he's going to rise to the challenge, which he did. 6 months later, he came back and he already sounded like a virtuoso player. That happened just by saying the right thing at the right time. So please do not discourage your son, your daughter, your cousin, your husband, your brother. Don't do that just because they don't sound like B.B. King meets Paco de Lucia today. They might tomorrow. And so it's important to stand back and wait for that flower to grow.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Where can people find the new album? How can they order it and keep track of what's going on? They can order from hackettsongs.com. Okay. My website is hackettsongs.com, and that points people towards the web store, which is called Sandbag. And that store we share with a number of other acts. It's a pretty big organization. Okay. And Radiohead, for instance, use Sandbag, and so we share that same. I've heard of them. Store, yeah. Yep. They're very, very good. So that's one place you can order it from. The official release date is on the 25th of this month. Okay. So, but there are people who've already gotten hold of copies, press and what have you. So it seems to be doing well. I've done that. There's my book, which is called A Genesis in My Bed. If you want to hear more about me spouting off and throwing light on what happened in the past and why was I lucky, it'll give you an idea of how I got to today from way back. From Quiet World all the way to the Performance Anxiety Podcast. It's amazing. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Is there a social media presence that people can follow, like Instagram or Twitter, that you'd like to throw out? Yeah, we do Twitter. Yeah, we do that. There's Facebook, although I don't operate it myself because otherwise I would be inundated with everyone wanting to be my friend. So that's at one stage removed. There's the website hackettsongs.com. Which people can, look at. There's
tons of videos. There's
two preview videos from the upcoming album.
Basically, the live album is a DVD. It is also Blu-ray.
Right.
Some tracks have already been released. I believe the track Under the Eye of the Sun has been out there. Deja Vu. So one Genesis track, one, a long lost Genesis track, one thing from solo from At the Edge of Light. So those two have been released, and I believe there's a third coming, and I can't remember off the top of my head what that one might be. But
that's okay.
I can barely keep up. There's so much stuff.
That'll just get more people going back to the site to check it out and see what it'll be.
Yeah. So it happened to be a great evening at Hammersmith last year, and it was a great show. It's the stereo mix is by Roger King, the surround mix is by Stephen Wilson. Yeah. For those who've got it in surround, and it's available on vinyl. Some of it's available on green vinyl. All these formats, and there's an art book with pictures.
Oh, cool!
There's masses of different formats out there of this stuff, but it's selling England by the pound live with Spectral Mornings.
Yeah,
that's how it's billed live at Hammersmith.
And from what I've heard of it is amazing. It's so good.
It was a great evening. The band had been playing that set, for the best part of a year, and so they knew it. The band knew it very well, and it was lovely to be able to do songs like, for instance, "More Fool Me," which was on Selling England by the Pound, which was just one guitar and Phil on early vocals. But the way we did it, we had, two guitars. Two guitars and two keyboards, just to flesh it out a little bit. It's still basically an acoustic stroke orchestral arrangement on it, but But Nad sings it wonderfully as if it was written for him, and there's an aspect of Cinderella songs that get to go to the ball in the finest dresses.
Yeah,
that's how I see it.
I've loved Nad's performance on that, and I'm going to go check his discography out more now because of this. So I appreciate you exposing me to some new people that I've really gotten into. So thank you. Yeah,
no, Nad's no slouch. He's got very interesting stuff himself, and he's getting stronger all the time. So that's great, and I'm very, very, very pleased to be able to bring people like Nad forward for others to celebrate. So that's part of what it's all about.
Thank you for so much time. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.